Morning, but not last talk. Jean-Louis Javito, who is not going to thank the organizers.
What?
Who is not going to thank the organizers.
No, I want to thank the organizers because Thierry and Francesco have set a wonderful meeting with a pluridisciplinar or multidisciplinar or transdisciplinar, I don't know the right word, between interesting people, and they invited me to join them to organize that, and I'm thankful for that, because such events are not so common, and it's a pleasure to participate of the effervescence of this kind of event. I'm not considering myself as a mathematician. I want to speak about computer science, but you will see that there are a lot of intersection between math and computer science. And in fact, the first part of my talk will be about that. You see on the screen, will be about that, some kind of intersection between programming, computer, and mathematics. And you see on the screen, there are two pictures representing two examples I have worked on, and that motivate in part that motivate this talk. The first one is no, it's not that. It's just this one. It's yeah. No, sorry. Okay. Show this that. That is a rough sketch, a kind of caricature of a biological phenomena, which is the gastrulation. In the gastrulation, you have a sheet of cells, kind of epithelial cells. This sheet is bending, and then there is a joining. And what I'm very proud is this. Look at the black token. The black token is just going from one element to the other element on bones, but when the sheet is joining, the token is making a circular round. So you have here an example when there are some processes, as I mentioned in my talk on the morphogenesis, that take place within the shape, but the shape is changing, and more dramatically, it's a topological change. What kind of mathematical formalism can I use for that? I don't know. There are some formalism where you have to bend shapes and to change some topological characteristic, for example, in general relativity. But in general relativity, what you do is to change the curvature of a predefined space. And that's not the same. Here I have a real surgery that occurs, and I cannot tell you before the execution, the simulation, what kind of shape will emerge. I don't have an embedding space that I can bend to represent all the form and the shape that can arise. So I can model it, I can simulate it on a computer, but I have a few tools to represent it and to reason about it. The second example is this one. You have a pianist player, it's playing the Concerto main gauche de Ravel, and you listen to the orchestra. But the orchestra is not here. It's in fact a recording, and what we want is that the machine listen to the musician, and we want to adapt the flow of the recording, of the playback, in order that the playback be in sync with the live performance of the instrumentist. For doing that, we must have an idea of what is the musical time. And I have no differential equation. I have no formalism that tell me what is the time that is built in the life of the performance by the musician. But you see, it's working. So it means that there are some systems. I can say some things. At least have a practical system that
they are using a feedback system.
There are some kind of feedback. Then. But in fact, it is what idea of time, what you must do to formalize the idea of musical time to achieve that, it's the entire second hour of my talk. So we will see. Going back to the model, here you see a wonderful model. So that's a real woman with is real rare, and you have the simulated one on your right. It was done by Marie Polcani. which is a very great computer graphist. And it was done initially for L'Oréal, which is a product of a maker of product for air. And so that's a simulation. Louder, sorry. Ah, that's my point. It's not the real physics. It's not a simulation made by first principle. Because if you do that, next year you are still moving one air amongst the 100,000 air. So there are a lot of simplification. The simplification is the air is simplified as a tri-articulated, a kind of pendulum.
You have to turn the table.
Yeah. So it's, that's an air, that's some springs linked by some masses. So it's just to say that one air is modeled as a discrete number of springs linked by some masses, and they are constrained in their movement. For example, they can move only. They are disposed in sheet, if you want, in plane. On the plane, they can move only in one plane, in 2D, not in 3D. Because hairdressers say air move like that, and they don't intermix like that between two planes of the air. And by making a lot of simplification, you can achieve some kind, what is called a phenomenological simulation. That means when you have the simulation, you show it to hairdresser and they say, ah, no, air are not moving like that, or, oh, yes, that's good. And L'Oréal is using that to try to change, for example, the coupling coefficient or the damping coefficient to see what the effect of lack of when you fix the air by some varnishes and things like that. So this is a model. Do we have a modeling of real physical phenomena? No, because it's not the current mechanic of the things, but I can do things like that. And if you think about the general situation of modeling, that's also true. Newtonian mechanics is a model which has a domain of validity. And what is interesting is to understand what is the validity of the domain where you can apply that. And that's a hard job. You have to do experiment and you have to look after all the facts you can collect. And the same here. I have a very strange thing. The object, the model, is a program. And in fact, this program is pretty big because when you are doing graphic, you have to handle a lot of things. So can we say that software is science? If I program a computer, do I have done a modeling, a useful modeling of some object? As I mentioned, the domain of validity of the modeling is also a question that takes place even for other kind of model, mathematical model. So that's not the point. The point is that, is my model intelligible? Can I say some things on that? Can I understand things? What is the explanational power of this model? And the other thing is that I can test that, the intelligibility, only if I can deduce something. Can I reason about the model? Can I go beyond the program? On the program, I'm happy with the program because the program I can simulate things. But can I go beyond simulation and make some kind of reasoning? And that's my motto for the first part of this talk is that I can do computer simulation, but can I relate computer simulation with mathematical modeling? Another way to ask the question is, can I under what condition a classical program, as you know what is, I suppose that you know what is programming, is a kind of classic mathematical object. Then I will elaborate a little bit on that. And my point is that, in fact, if you look at computation as a kind of rewriting, and I will explain that what is rewriting, then you can relate mathematical modeling on computer modeling. And then on the last part of my talk, I will talk about what kind of modeling we can do for the musical time. So, declarative programming. Programming is a formal or rigorous activity. It's not me, the computer guy, that say that, but a well-known mathematician that do wonderful differential geometry, William Thurston. And William Thurston say in this article, which is not a technical article, but a reflection about his activity of mathematician, that in fact, it was surprised in another article. The article was in answer of another article by Jeff and Quinn. And he said, no, I'm not agree with Jeff and Quinn. They said that, for example, they said that mathematics is the most rigorous and the hardest activities, but no, that's not true. I have done some computer programming, and I can tell you, if you read the things, that the programming is much harder. You have to bookkeep a number of and you have to be very, very, very careful in order that it works. It's much more rigorous than the rigor we have to apply on the formalism the formalization we have to apply in mathematical proof. But at the same time, large computers have always, they seem to have always bugs. So what's the problem? So a program is a formal object, is defined with a lot of rigor, an extreme rigor, but is it a model? Is it a mathematical model, or can we reason about it? Not really. And for a problem which is called referential transparency. At the right, you have a set of equations. Okay, some algebra, and you want to solve some equation on this algebra. On your left, you have a fragment of an imperative program, say a C program. Everybody knows C or Python or some kind of imperative programming language? No, you don't know.
Fortran is the same.
Yes, Fortran is the same. No, but exactly right. So in Fortran or in C, on Python, or other kind of imperative language, you write some statement.
We don't use anymore the cards.
But Fortran is
But you have trace of the card in the current form of Fortran. For example, there is no terminator of an instruction because the natural terminator is the end of the card.
84.
Yes, you have to do the next line. Here, you have a terminator, and instead of seeing that as a kind of terminator, see it, that's a more useful view, as a kind of sequencing operator between instructions. These are instructions, they are not equations, okay? So an instruction that says x is 3, y is 2, and then I compute something for z. So if you do the computation on the left, and if you solve the equation on the right, in fact, you have the same things. You can look in the memory, you see that x is 3, y is 2, and that's the same for the resolution. Ah, wonderful. In fact, this fragment is very similar to a set of equations. Not really so, because, for example, for my program, I can add a new instruction. And so I change the value of x. That's forbidden, absolutely, in equation. You don't change the definition, because if you change the definition, it's a mess, okay? So, but what happens in my imperative program? I have four assignments instead of one. So you can, at some point, look only at the first three, because the sequencing operators say, I have to do that first. So in this case, I have the same results like previous. But you say also, okay, the sequencing operator is not really a sequencing operator, it's a terminator. I can look at the last three equations. But in this fact, if I want to solve that, I have a problem, because x is 1, given by this assignment, y is 2, given by this assignment, and z has an unknown value, because if I do only that, I need to use the value of x, but x has not been set, so I have no value, so I have some kind of garbage. What is the result depends on what is in the memory at this point. And if I consider the four equations, I have another result. I'm not happy at all with that, because the result on the programming side, the imperative program, depends on the order of calculation, and there may be several definitions for the same variable, which is not good. The problem is the notion of variable you have. What is the difference between an imperative program variable in an imperative program, like Fortran, or a mathematical variable? A programming variable, in fact, is a box, and in the box, you put some value. If you put some value, you can remove it and put some other value. This is not at all what happens in mathematics. In mathematics, the relationship between the variable, it's a name, an alias, and the value, and so you have a binding, and you are not allowed to break the binding. In other words, a mathematical variable has a constant value. It's not a variable at all. It's just a possibly unknown binding, for a name to some quantities. These quantities can be known or not known, but this binding cannot break. And a computer variable, at least in the imperative sense, is a value that varies in time. It's more a dynamical system. So if we want to join, to make possible the reasoning about programs on the model we write into programs, as we reason in mathematics, simple, just forbid what is painful, that is, you forbid to reassign a value to a variable. And that exists from the end of the 60s, and is called static single assignment languages. In this kind of languages, you are allowed to provide only one assignment for a name. Okay, there is a problem with that. If you think about that, now, for example, the current computers run at 3 gigahertz, meaning that you have several billions of instructions per second. It means that if you are doing only that, all programs finish in less than 2 or 3 seconds. And that's not true. You always wait some computation to finish. Why? Because there are some iteration. In fact, the code is reused because you can put the code in a loop. For example, here, I just sum all the number from 0 to 10. If I put that you can rewrite that as A equal A plus Y. Huh? Okay, it's just a synthetic sugar. If I have an assignment within a loop, then the variable receive a lot of different values, or the same values, but I cannot be in single static assignment format. There are solutions to that. For example, a very old language called APL, that was done at IBM by Iverson, in fact, want to manipulate, for example, arrays or things like that, globally. So iota is an operator that creates a vector from 0 to 9, and then you use this kind of fancy operator. This is a reduction with a plus, which in fact amount T's correspond to the loop, T's correspond to the addition, and then you have in one assignment the whole result. That's not enough, but we will back to this problem after. So suppose for the moment that I can work with my static single assignment constraint. I'm not completely finished, because here, what I really want to achieve is equational reasoning. Equational reasoning is the basic reasoning in mathematics, the most basic one, when you can replace a variable by its definition. Okay, donc here there is some kind of replacement. Okay, the big word for replacement is substitution. I can do some substitution, but the substitution is done in some order. And I have first to establish these bindings, and then I substitute in that. And the order is given here by the sequence operator, even if it is not very apparent. So, for example, if I use that, in fact, when I solve my problem or I run it, I have an undefined value for z, because z is using y, and y has not received already its value. So it's not enough to have a static single assignment format. We have also to deal with the sequence, in which sequence, in which order we do the substitution. Okay? Hopefully, there are some tools to do that for you. In fact, we consider a partial order, which is the order of dependency. For example, for computing x, for computing z, I need to have the value of x. So I set that z is greater than x, and okay, the same for y. So I have a partial order, and I'm able, this partial order represents or capture all the computational dependency between the expression. And thanks, you know that when you have a partial order, you can extend it in a total order. And if you have a total order, you have the schedule of your substitution. You know in which order you put the computation. I have So this set of assignment can be now see as a set of equations, and this equation can be ordered, and for doing that, you can see the order between the variables here, or, and it's more useful, instead of putting boxes that are the variable and an order between the variable, what is more interesting and more useful is to have all the sub-expression, all the computation you have to done in your program, and in fact the variable just label the edges between the computation. Okay, and we will use this graph. This graph is called a data flow graph. And when you have a data flow graph, you cannot refrain, especially if you are an electrical engineer, to see that as a kind of electrical circuit, and you know in electrical circuit that there is an operational view. The operational view is to say, okay, it's a machine, and I can make this machine functioning. For example, here, the values are tokens that flows in the graph, and when they reach some, does not want to go? When they reach some boxes in the input, then the boxes put some output value, the transform value, and then I have the result. Every node does not eat all the input to produce an output. For example, I can have a box, a node, which is a kind of conditional operator. With the conditional operators, when the input tells that you will eat, you need the data from one of the two other inputs, for instance. And here I have erased my graph as with the functioning, but in fact it's better to keep the graph and just because part of the graph can be reused in the computation. We'll see shortly. Okay, to handle iteration. So now I have a set of equations, and I have a machine. The machine is the data flow graph, and there is an operational procedure that says, take the token, flow it in the graph, then you have the result of the set of equations. Is it true? Okay. Here I have a set of equations, and if you see that as a set of equations, it has no solution. It has no solution because x plus y equals z, so x equals 0, but I set that x equals 3, so this set of equations admit no solution. What is the situation for the graph? The graph here, the data flow graph, becomes cyclic because there is some recursive dependency in the equation. And in this branch, in the red branch, in fact, there is no token. Because there is no token in this branch, you cannot produce any further token. So this branch is dead. The plus is never activated. So there is no output for Z and for Y too. And so the graph in the functioning just doesn't move. And if it doesn't move, it doesn't produce solution, exactly as the set of equations that does not produce any solution. I change a little bit my equation. No, there is a solution. There is a solution. X is 3, Y is minus 2, and Z is minus 1. What happens for the graph? But the graph doesn't move. It doesn't move because there is no token in the cycle, and if there is no token in the cycle, it cannot produce token, and then it means that it does not produce anything. So this is an example where the operational functioning of the graph and the set of equations does not agree on what they are doing. Going back to iteration, as I said, in fact, we have to handle iteration because if we don't handle iteration, we don't have interesting program or interesting equation. So here I put it's just the definition of factorial. I want to compute factorial of 3, and this is the definition of factorial, and this definition is a recursive one. In fact, I can take this right-hand side and picture it as a kind of data flow graph. And what happens is that when I want to compute here, then I unfold this equation, and I have here the things. And it appears that, in fact, this unfolding stops at some point. And then you see that I have a data flow graph, but this data flow graph is given in an intentional manner. I don't give you the data flow graph always explicitly. Sometimes is described by some kind of procedure, and when the computation occurs, this procedure produces the data flow graph I need. I can say that, okay, I abstract the input tree, and I have to consider the data flow graph without knowing the number of unfolding I need. That means that you have to deal with infinite graph. Computer scientists are not happy to deal with infinite graph because you cannot pack an infinite graph in infinite memory. But that's not a problem because, in fact, the infinite graph represents all possible computation, but for one precise computation, there is always a finite graph that do that, at least if your computation stops. So this is what happens here. I unfold the graph, and it happens that after 3 unfolding, I never need the output of this potential subgraph, and then I can compute the things here. So that's good. That's good, but can I do better? In fact, of having a potentially infinite graph, even if I use only a finite portion at one time, can I fold an infinite graph into a finite one? Sometimes. In fact, a lot of times. If the infinite graph is a regular infinite graph, meaning that there is a pattern and the pattern can describe the whole unfolding, I can fold the pattern, and another way to explain that is that if you have a loop, just unfold the loop by cycling the loop, and then you have an infinite non-cyclic graph. And here, in fact, I have a cyclic graph that computes the previous result. But to tell the truth, this finite graph does not do exactly the same computation as the one before. In fact, can we transform every kind of infinite graph that represents a potential computation into a finite one, which is cyclic? In some sense, yes, but the answer is not very satisfying. I say in some sense yes because these graphs are computation, so we have structure theorem that say this computation can run on a Turing machine. A Turing machine is just a program that runs only one cycle. The cycle is the while loop that look after all the instruction, and then what you have is one loop, but an infinite tape. Okay? So what I can always do, for sure, is to have a cyclic graph with one loop, the external one, but the token must embed what corresponds to the infinite tape. So I can always have a finite graph, but my token here are then not only numbers, but they represent an unbounded data structure. So I can wrap it in a finite control, but then I have to have unbounded data. So here, to explain the functioning of this graph, here I just generate all the numbers from 1 to n, which is a good thing to compute factorial. Here, I compute the product in one body of the function of the factorial. This one, okay, the result of the product is put back to compute the next product. But then it means that at the output here, I generate all the factorial from 1 to n. Okay? And my initial program was to have the answer only for one precise n. So I use equality here on a conditional to just select the result I want. So here I have some loop that works infinitely, but for the infinite stream of factorial number, I just select the one I want. So I come again with this idea that in fact, so I can have a set of equations and I can compute. There are some other difficulties that appear. Every kind of specification, set of equations, or in this sense here, I have a set of equations that define predicates. I'm dealing with very basic values that are just Boolean values. And I'm going to define ancestor between siblings. So if x is the father or the mother of y, then I say that x is an ancestor of y, and then I want to compute the transitive closure, the reflexive transitive closure of that, and saying that x is an ancestor of y if x is ancestor of z, if there is a z, such that x is ancestor of z, and z is an ancestor of y. And that's a perfect a logical definition of ancestor. However, if I write that in a language that makes possible to write equation between Booleans, this language is called Prolog, for example, in fact, this is a not very productive...
Sorry, what it means, double dot minus?
That's the equivalent of the implication here. Not exactly, but I have to enter in a lot of detail to explain the subtle difference between the logical implication and the entailment. It's called entailment in Prolog. We have not time and it's not interesting for our things. What I mean is that I can have a logical definition, but logical definitions are not always constructive. In fact, this definition is not constructive because I have to find a z. And I can find a z only if I have a procedure to select the z. And if I have an unbounded domain, what I can do is to iterate, but I'm not sure to find it, the current z. This one is a much better definition. It's equivalent to the previous one. And what I did, instead of making here ancestor, I use parent here, okay? And it happens that it computes the same transitive closure for the relation parent into the relation ancestor. But this one is executable, is productive, is constructive, and this one is not. I will not enter in this detail because if I have to enter this detail, we have to do logic, and do logic in the meaning of computer scientist, not really a mathematician. We do proof theory, not model theory of logic. Okay, so what I have shown for the moment is a test of the idea that a program can be seen as a set of equations, but that causes some problem. When I see it as a set of equations, I have a procedure which is the operational view of the graph that computes some things, and I have the equational view that, okay, it's a set of equations of something. Can I relate the two? And I see a lot of problems in this relationship. In fact, the situation between the two, how I can relate the two, have been cleared by a guy called Gilles Kahn in the 70s, 74. In fact, in a paper, Gilles Kahn say, okay, what I can say is the following. When I look what the token, the value that flows on an edge, in fact, there is not only one value. So instead of what I have shown to you, that I associate a value with an edge, in fact, what I show if I look on an edge, I see, especially in circular graph, a stream of value. I use the word stream and not the word list because stream may be potentially infinite and because there are a causal relationship or a timing relationship in that. The order of the stream is also the order of computation in time. Okay? So what Gilles Kahn say in this paper is that you can look at an arbitrary data flow graph. This arbitrary data flow graph can be seen as a fixed point equation. And the solution of this fixed point equation is the same as the operational functioning, compute the same things as the operational functioning of the data graph, if, only if, some condition that will be stated in the next slide. My problem is, what is exactly a stream? Can I define mathematically what is a stream? How can we be sure that the stream equations are well posed and have only one solution? So, Gilles Kahn state, okay, so Gilles Kahn state some condition, but it has been proved only 10 years after. And the condition is the following. The operational functioning of the data flow graph and the fixed point equation agree on what they compute if the function f that appears here, which is buried in the node of the data flow graph and in the shape of the graph, are stream function. That means here, this plus one must be seen as a kind of function, but function on streams. It transforms the input stream into output streams, and it is a function, not a relationship. And I will show you some things that are not function. To understand that, in fact, we have to do to answer what is a stream and what is the solution of a stream equation. We have to do a glimpse of domain theory. Domain theory was developed by Dana Scott to understand what is a fixed point when fixed points are computed. So the idea is that, in fact, you are looking for the solution of equations that are given in what is called a domain. A domain is a set of values with a minimal element, which is called bottom, and which has an order, and the order must be a complete partial order. Complete means that if you have two elements, you have always a sub-element below the two, and that any increase in sequence have a list per bound. The domain must embed the limit of the ascending chain of ascending sequence of elements you can have. The partial order represents, in fact, the gain of information as the computation proceeds. And on this kind of domain, you can define function, and a function on a domain is code continuous if you can exchange the limit on the function. Okay, so the limit of the function applied to a sequence, a growing sequence of x, is also if f applied to the growing sequence, the limit of the growing sequence. This limit always exists because I ask for a complete order, and continuous is just saying that I can exchange the two. And the result is that if f is code continuous, then the equation x equal f to x has always a solution. And the solution, there can be many, but there are at least one. I have solution, but these solutions are embedded in a domain where there is an order. So I can order the solution, and there is, but remember that solutions are not always comparable. Because the order is partial, but there is always a least solution which is comparable with all the order, and this least solution can be obtained like that. You start from bottom and you iterate the function on that, and the limit of that gives you the least solution of the set of equations. And then Scott developed a whole theory, domain theory, to construct domain from basic domain, and to characterize code continuity. The motto he has in mind is that, in fact, computable in domain means continuous. And that's a kind of church, it's like the Church-Turing thesis. The Church-Turing thesis say, okay, what is computable is computed by lambda calculus or by a Turing machine, and then Scott say, if it is computable, it must be continuous in some domain. Okay? And then Scott was motivated by giving a model, a mathematical model of lambda calculus. Lambda calculus just look at the function, but in an intentional way, not an extensional way. It was the former view of function. Before Dirichlet, functions are procedure and they produce some result because you have some rule to compute the output from the input. That's a very computational point of view about function. With Dirichlet, they say no, a function is a relation between an input, the input domain and the output domain, and this relationship just establishes some things and has some properties. I have only one image for each element. So the Dirichlet view is the relational view, the extensional view of a function. It's very efficient. You can define things that are function in the Dirichlet sense, but that are not function in the intentional sense. Lambda calculus tries to formalize what is an intentional function. In lambda calculus, all things are function, and then it means that the set of lambda expression, the set of function you can write, are functions. So you want to write this kind of equation. And if you think about this kind of equation, you say, oh, that's a fixed point equation. That's to explain why we are dealing with this fixed point. If you look at that very straightforward, you say, okay, that's not possible because the only solution of that is the empty set. In fact, there is things that I consider only the continuous function. Okay? And if I consider only the continuous function, then this set can have a solution which is not empty, and this is lambda calculus. And that was the first model from the logical theory of lambda calculus. So we have to construct this kind of domain, domain to answer that, and we have to establish that there is a domain that fulfills this equation. And you see a kind of two-level things. I characterize the solution in a domain, but I can define domain by fixed point equation too. And Dana Scott has done the theoretical apparatus to do that. So in the domain, there is one that interests me, is the domain of an infinite stream. What is an infinite stream? An infinite stream is sorry, I'm stopped because what I have written here is not the domain of infinite stream, it's the domain of finite stream. Okay? A finite stream is what? Is either you have no element, it's the empty stream, or you have one element and a finite stream. This is exactly what I write here, and I write this as a kind of equation. The finite list on element x is called x étoile, the monoid on x if you want, and in fact it's the solution of that, and it's a domain. More generally, we start from basic domain, and the most basic domain are called the flat domain. Recall that I said that the order on the domain represents the gain on information as the computation proceeds. When you have a number, for example, there is not too much choice in the information you have. Either you don't have any information, that's bottom, or you know the value of your number. So the order on Z, for example, Z flat, is this following. Okay? With that, you have basic element, an order on your basic value. The order seems not very interesting, but it becomes interesting as soon as you compose the domain to have a more sophisticated domain. For example, if you take a product of Z flat, if you have two elements, a Cartesian product, either you don't know any value, or you know the left value, or the right value, or you know the two values. So, starting from flat domain, you start having some kind of structure that represents the progression of the computation when you have to compute two values in a Cartesian product. For the list, what is interesting is that the technological apparatus from Dana Scott is giving you the domain. Okay, it exists, but it provides you also a standard order on it. And for example, for finite list, which are a solution of this kind of equation, the order is that a list is more defined than another one if each element of the more defined list is more defined than the first list. Okay, so if a list is x1, x2, x3, and so on y, y1, y2, y3, then for any xy is less known than yy, yi. Okay, okay. And the bottom element is this one, is the element where you have no element at all. In this kind of domain, you can compare only lists that have the same number of elements. Then you have variation, then you have a list, you can compare we have not the same element. And what is interesting for stream, so stream are infinite number of elements. And the stream, as I mentioned before, on a data flow graph for the Gilligan principle, elements are produced one after the other. So when you progress in the stream, you progress in the known values. Meaning that I don't want to know the value now and the value in 10 days and then come back for the value for tomorrow. What I have to know is the value now, the value tomorrow, after tomorrow, and so on. So what's the right order on the stream to represent interactive and causal computation is the prefix order. In the prefix order, two elements are comparable if the less defined element is a prefix of the other one. So it's time to give you some examples that are not stream function. For example, the merge is not a stream function. Okay, why? Because the merge is just a node, and I know how to do it operationally. You have two inputs, and the output is just the merge of the values when they come. If the value comes from the right, and there is no value on the left, so the right goes the output, the same vice versa, and if the two arrive, then you choose something. That's why you have a relationship and not a function. But it happens that that does not fit in the Kahn principle, so there is a well-defined operational semantic for that, but this operational semantics does not agree with any kind of equation you can write. And in fact, the situation, you have to understand that here, the situation of having stream function is very subtle, in fact. To give you an example, here I have a node which double. Double is just a process that qui bégaye, stoppers. The fact is that I have one input, I give you 2 times the output. The output is 2 times the input, okay? I take a merge, and then here I have buffer, and this buffer, the one buffer say nothing, do nothing, it's just the identity function. This one, in fact, is a delay. I output one token only if a second token is coming. It's a kind of buffer, you know, it's a register. When the first token enter, I put it in the register, in the memory, in the store, and I output it only when there is the next token that come, and when the next token that come, it takes the place of the first token, and the first token is outputted. So, I said before, merge here is not a function, but I want to recover the GAN principle, so I do the following trick. I know that a relationship can be seen as a function if I see as a function on the power domain of the input. Okay? So in fact, instead of having a token like numbers, I have or in stream on numbers, I want to represent stream of set of numbers. And then merge become a function. Because I can say that the merge of 2 streams y and v that start by x and u are the set x followed by the merge of y and uv, that means I have the first, or the symmetric representation. So it seems that the things are working well. I have turned my non-function on stream as a function on stream of power domain of the values. But if I look the things carefully, I take that and I put it in another stream, in another data flow graph. That's exactly normally what I'm allowed to do with transparential referency. If I have a formalism that is referentially transparent, I can replace any subset of the computation by an equivalent. And if I look at the input-output, they are equivalent. But if I put that in that, and I look at the output of this bigger graph, then they are not equivalent anymore. And what happens here, he has puzzled the people a lot, especially broken Ackermann that come with the counterexample, because they really tried to say that no, I am in the condition, in the settings, in the hypothesis of the Gilles-Kahn principle. In fact, no, because I have I have the power set of values, and there is no one unique definition of the power domain. If you understand domain as things that you compute, then you have to be very careful with the computation of the power domain of a set, because you know it changes the class of things. Programs are computable functions, they are denumberable. If I go into a non-denumberable set, then it cannot be domain in some sense because there is too much element. In fact, I can have some non-denumberable domain. There is a lot of non-denumberable domain, but then I have to say that every element can be approached in a controlled way by a denumberable domain. It becomes messy, and the net result is that there is no one possible definition of a power domain, and the power domain is not what you want to do as a power set. So just keep in mind that the basic things like stream function are working well, but there are some subtleties, and you have to look careful for that. So that's the conclusion of my is the conclusion of what? Is the conclusion of my motto. It is if you want to reason on the program as in kind of mathematics, you reason about definition and hypothesis to do theorem, then consider it as a set of equations and choose your domain, because we can do different various domains. And in fact, in computer science, we have effectively used a different kind of domain. For example, if you do functional programming, as Alice do in Haskell, then you deal with a set of functional equations. If you do music, you do with audio graph, where the stream are stream of buffer, audio buffer. Hein. If you do Prolog, you are doing with sorry, predicate and Boolean equation. If you do with array, you have APL. If you do relational databases like SQL, then you do a set of finite relation, and so on. A program is to program, you choose a suitable algebra. And there is something I put in blue is syntactic sugar. As you have seen, giving the set of equations you want to solve can be a difficult thing because it can be very enormous. For example, functional, it depends on the input. So syntactic sugar just help you to define the set of equations you need for the program in a very concise or expressive way. If you don't choose the right operation, then you have to reconstruct a lot of things. It can be just not feasible. Then you have to choose a solver. The set of operation you admit on the node is very important to express the program. And then programming is solving a set equation. If there is no solution, you loop. In fact, the it seems to contradict what I said before. There is always a solution which is the bottom element. But the bottom element is identified with the, or there, either you can say there is no result, or there is no result, but you can say it because the program is looping and you don't know if it's stopped or not. If there is one solution, okay, it's the easy case, you agree. If there is several solutions, then you can enumerate all solutions, which is done in Prolog, for example, or you pick one which is with a characteristic properties, for example, to be the least one as computed by the fixed point equation. And the mathematical reasoning is available in algebra on your program and so on. I just want, before finishing, because I think that I have 2 minutes, to give you an example of algebra of list. It was developed by Bird and Mertens, and it's a very beautiful piece of work. You can find it in the program which is called Algebra of Programming. And the idea is that what kind of algebra I can do with list. List doesn't seem a very well-suited mathematical object, but no, they can do. They do it on list, and they can do it on things that are more general than list, that are called named product or disjoint union, and so on. And the right setting is to do, you have to say category theory, but we can do a lot of things with that category, and I will do that. So I want to manipulate alpha list. Alpha is the basic set of value you want to manipulate, and I'm not interested here on a specific alpha, so I keep some kind of unknown variable that designate the underlying set. And I will manipulate list of alphas, finite list of alphas that are defined by this kind of equation. I have 3 operations, only 3, which is the map, which take a function that transforms an alpha into a beta. You apply it on a list to have a beta list. It's the classical map. You just iterate the element and you transform each element by the function I have given to the map. So map is a higher order operator because it takes a function as an argument on a list to give you a not list. When I have 2 lists, I can concatenate the list, and the concatenation is written by a sharp. And I need also something to reduce the list, because sharp expand the list, map keep the same list, but I want to have to compute lists that have different values. So what the reduction is, I take an initial value, I take a function that transforms an alpha into a beta, I take an alpha list and I produce a beta. So for example, classical example is here. I take here, for example, the absolute value, and then I have a list with signed numbers, and I receive the... No, sorry, I made some mistake. Here I have, yes, I have a bit... I take a beta, an alpha, and I give a beta. And so, instead of this signature, I must have the right signature for the reduction is the following. I take a beta, I take a function that take a beta, an alpha, and that give me a beta. I take it an alpha list, and I receive a beta list. You are not customized. Here I have function of function of function. If you are a bit lost, just replace the previous arrows by a Cartesian product. The difference between the two is that I have what is called a Curriate form of function. That's just technical detail, not interesting here. So I can study my operators that are well-known operators on list from an algebraic point of view. The concatenation is associative. The map distribute over the concatenations. That means if I apply a map on a list that is made of the concatenation of two sublists A and B, it's the same as applying my function f by a map on A, on B, on the concatenating the result. That's obvious. Function composition distribute over a map, and it's called loop fusion. Why? When the map can be seen as a loop, because it has to iterate the element and apply the things. So if you have the composition f composed to B to G map to R, that's the same as applying the G map to A and then to F. If you look at that, you have one loop with a body, which is the composition of the two functions. Here you have two loops, the two maps that appear here, that are done in sequence because the composition is sequence the computation. That's why it's called loop fusion, because if you start with that, it means that you have two consecutive loops, and these consecutive loops can be rewritten in one loop that takes all the things. Map on inverse function commute, if the function is inversible. The reduction distribute over the sharp, the concatenation, meaning that if you have to reduce a list made by two sublists, then it's the same that compute the reduction of the two lists, and then with a f here. For doing that, you need to have f associative, A, B not empty, and the full signature of the reduction. Introduce a beta element, which is the answer of the reduction if the list is empty. But what we do is usually, if we drop in, is that we say f as a neutral element, and we use it implicitly at the first argument of that. With this notation, then f applied to a singleton, reduced to a singleton, give the singleton. Give f de A. It's f applied to A here. Okay. The concatenation seems that induce a structure of sublist to destructuring list. So I want to express that as a kind of homomorphism. So I said that a function h on list is an homomorphism of concatenation if I can distribute like that. It exists f such at complete, and it corresponds to a divide and conquer computation. And I can determine the h only by the f and the value of h on the a. And I have a theorem that if a function is a homomorphism of concatenation, then it can be always written in a very simple way. That means if you have a very complex computation, but you know by some argument that is an homomorphism, then it can be computed just as a map followed by a reduction. Okay? The set of homomorphism function has interesting properties. For example, reduction is itself an homomorphism. Map is an homomorphism. And for example, to say that there is not only reduction on map but an homomorphism, the size function is an homomorphism. It's just computed by that. You replace all the elements in your list by one, and you sum it by a reduction. Okay, can I do some more interesting things? Yes, I can prove that if h is an injective function, then it is an homomorphism. I can apply it to synthesize program. For example, I want to compute the reverse function. You know what is reversing a list. Reverse is injective because reverse is bijective. You apply two times and you give the same element. So reverse, by my theorem, must be written as a map followed by a reduction. And here we have the example to do. So you can think reverse as a complex function because usually you have to put a stack and to put the element in the stack and to reverse it. But you can rewrite it as just two operations, a map and a reduction. So that is an example of what we can do. Just an example, and this example is important because it shows that I compute solution of equation, but not necessarily the solution you want. Here I have a list E, and I said the list E is equal to 1 concatenate to E, I cut to 3 elements. The colon operator is just take. I take 3 elements. The plus here is implicitly applied on each element. And if you look at the effect of this equation on the element E1, E2, E3, E4, alors I know that this is 4 elements. Why? Because E cut to 3 has necessarily 3 elements. And I concatenate 1 element, so I can deduce that E is a list with 4 elements. If I write the equation induced by this global equation on the element, I have that. I choose it because it's a kind of harmonic equation on a discretized road, if you want. My Gilles-Kahn principle said that, in fact, I have the list solution, but the list solution is bottom everywhere. Obviously, what you want is not the list solution, but the solution of your harmonic equation on that. So I have computed a solution. It's a good solution in my domain, but obviously you want not to compute in domain. You want to compute in vectorial space, and in vectorial space, this is the solution you want. So don't believe that it gives you, there is no miracle. I can do some things, but they have some limit. Just here is the recursive, suppose that you want to diffuse it on a road, that the result of the computation is a surface. The surface is the replication of the road alone time, and I want to compute on each point the value of the heat. And I can write it as a set of global equation, like using all the operations I have seen before. I don't want to enter the detail, I stop here, but here is the result of what has been computed. And I stopped here, and we will come back again after the coffee. We change domain, and we want to focus on the modeling of time for music. Thank you.
Okay.